and please engage throughout the webinar and send us any questions that you like, and we'll, if we don't get a chance to answer them all, we certainly will follow up with answers post the event. First of all, could I introduce Tikka and James? I'll allow these wonderful people with incredible insights to introduce themselves, and in the space of about 60 seconds, just provide the audience with a little bit of a background. In the world of webinars, Zooms, and virtual, folks, just make sure that you are not muted. Okay, so turn your mutes off. Tikka, could you please introduce yourself?
Yes, hi everyone. So I'm Tikka Hessing. I work for Cushman and Wakefield, and I'm a human geographer. So what that means is I create workplace strategies for our clients. And as a human geographer, I really love studying human behavior and really do research into how do people work. What type of spaces do they need? What type of environment do they need to work well? And what does that ultimately mean for their real estate strategy? So taking into consideration the behavioral aspects, the physical aspects, and also the digital aspects. And that's especially an area that we will focus on during today's session.
Well, I must say, Tikka, I've never heard or met a human geographer before, and I look forward to exploring it, because I think what you do and the way you articulate some of these challenges going forward is going to be extremely relevant. Dr. James Carlopio, could you introduce yourself, please?
Good morning, Brian, Tikka, Ryan, everybody. Hope you're all happy and well. And look, a little bit different background in one sense from Tikka, although we share lots of social science background. My degrees are all in various forms of psychology, so in that sense we're very similar. But I've taken a more full-time academic route, even though I'm a partner with Brian in the cultural cybersecurity business. I spend most of my time in and around universities, doing full-time consulting for a few years here and there, but mainly doing part-time consulting and looking at organization culture, which is why we talk about cultural cybersecurity in our business. And that's why I'm so interested and looking forward to the talk today, because with this wonderful mix of Ryan's technical knowledge and Tikka's human knowledge and my different take on human knowledge, hopefully we'll have a good chat. So good morning, everybody.
Great. Could I just get underway? Ryan, could you send a poll? We'd just like to ask people to respond to a simple poll question, just to get an insight as to where your thinking is sitting at the moment prior to this conversation taking place. Okay. Thank you for that. Now, look, the COVID-19 has plummeted the traditional workplace environment into a sense of organised disarray. It is one of our greatest working challenges. People have gone from the office to the home, sometimes back to the office, sometimes partially to the office and partially at home. Some organisations claim this has seen an increase in productivity. Some are loss in creativity. Some say they don't know what's going on anymore. The informal networks have died. But we now have the situation where managers and leaders are expected to build and maintain high performance teams. And this, of course, represents a significant challenge. And we have a situation, how do they do that? When in many instances, organizations have got new hires on board and they've never face-to-face physically met their line managers and their supervisors. Some CFOs think it's a brilliant way to actually significantly reduce cost in terms of rent on properties. And that's going to great. It's going to drive profitability up, but for how long and at what cost? Many expect the pendulum to swing back to some degree, some sometimes so fully. So the question is, how do we navigate a leadership path through the new potential hybrid workplace model? So my question to Tikka and James, and no particular order, jump in. Are we preempting too quickly what the future will look like in respect of the hybrid workforce model, or do we need to wait a bit longer?
Well, the very short answer, I guess, is yes. No one really can look into the crystal ball and know what the future will be. But I also think that we also, in a year's time, we will still don't know. I think the answer to this question, or perhaps the solution, is like a series of experiential or experimental solutioning and tailoring to the needs at hand. And this sounds a bit high level perhaps, but what I mean by that is really understanding, okay, how are our people doing at the moment? What do they need in terms of their work, and what are the spatial requirements? And here is also the challenge, especially when you relate it to real estate and perhaps also to technology, is on one hand, we want to be super flexible in terms of how we use space and how we work, and it may change one week to the other. Let's say as an organization, we need to look at the business goals. What are those? How do different teams work and what are their goals? And then you've got the individuals, and the individuals may have a different preference of how they work based on their roles and based on their projects. And then when you have the real estate, that is often, the bricks and mortar, it is a very inflexible. So how do you then combine it all? And curious as well to hear from a technology perspective, like what type of technologies work well. It's often quite a long process to go and work or to sign up a new technology solution, as that will be part of your business solutioning for a number of years. So how do we deal with that? So there are a lot of questions, and the future is exciting. And I think by co-creation with your people in the organization, we can create that experimental solutioning.
Okay, thank you. James, do you have any view on that?
Absolutely, yes. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Tikka. Yeah, Tikka and I agree with the this notion of tailoring, and we've talked a lot about this before when we were, prepping for the conversation today. I very much believe that it's all about fit. Some people should be able to work more from home because that makes sense for them, and other people should be able to come in when they need to. It's like, to link it back to Tikka's world, who wants to be in an open office and who wants to be in a closed private office? Well, there's different needs, right? If you need a private conversation or you need to concentrate, you don't want to be in a bullpen with 40 other people and lots of noise, right? That doesn't work. So I think the same thing, Brian, is this work from home. Because you lose some things when you're not face to face, and I'm sure we'll get onto that, because we know that, like you mentioned at the very start, right? Some people think they're losing creativity, they're losing the ability to meet people, they might not be able to be as productive, and other people I know are 10 times as productive, right? So I always come back to, the shortest answer I can give you is it's a matter of fit, and let's do, what is it, horses for horses?
Horses for courses. But on that point, right? So, if we do, are we too early? And the general consensus I interpret from both of you is that, yes, we've got to wait and see how this plays out and how we deal with this post-COVID world. And we all, we acknowledge we're not there yet, but we already have. I'm aware of CFOs absolutely here and now, in fact, made the decision months ago to reduce their floor spaces, in one instance from 5 floors in a Sydney CBD office back to 1 floor. Now they've already made that decision. That decision was on the basis of pure economics. Do you think that's a rational decision, taking into consideration the broader health of its workforce and its ability to function effectively going forward?
Well, I just wanted to clarify my point before, because I don't believe you should just wait and see. I think definitely get into action. And what I mean by get into action is start understanding how your organization works. So take this time and the opportunity to do that research and find what the right fit may be. But when you're solutioning, put in flexibility. with real estate and organizations, they may have a lease expiry coming up, and they think, well, this is the best opportunity because I can now renegotiate and get rid of a couple of floors. Well, if that turns out to be the wrong way forward, then you will actually have a lot of costs later on when acquiring more real estate again and fitting out new space again. I think to actually make those tangible decisions, I would go with a more cautious approach there, or potentially even saying there are some businesses that we are seeing, they are moving into co-working spaces, for example, because you've got shorter term leases there and more flexibility to change according to your needs. And
we got a comment from one of the attendees with that they'd previously worked in the UK, and a lot of their colleagues in direct reports were split almost globally. And so the pandemic was not a major disruption because they had this legacy of experience in this remote working. Do you think that means it can always work in a split thing, or there are going to, and I want to raise a couple of issues with you more specifically, but from a psychology or perspective, James, and you've said before, horses for courses or courses for horses, do you need to be a certain personality type to be able to work effectively in that? And is that just not for everybody?
No, absolutely, Brian. I think it's great. And thank you for the comment as well. Yes, I mean, if you've already been geographically spread, then yeah, perhaps this has been not a big deal for you at all, right? Because you're already that way. But I do think, Brian, yeah, your point is great about personality. We all know there's introverts and there's extroverts, right? It's one of the most basic, simple distinctions in personalities. And many of us misunderstand it. Extroverts are not always good public speakers, and introverts are not always hating. I'm an introvert, even though I make a living, as we often do, by talking to people. So it's got more to do about where you get your energy from and how you process information. But because of that, yes, introverts might, for example, be very happy to stay at home and not miss that social interaction and the talking things through, because a lot of extroverts process information by talking about it, and therefore they might miss that chat in the hallway. So yeah, it's something to, I think Tikka mentioned that as well. There's individual differences, right? And then there's organizational needs. And it's really hard to put all that together and satisfy everybody.
I completely agree, James. And I think as well, when you sign up to work for a certain company, you take things into account. So if you're signing up for a company that works completely virtual, you've taken it into consideration when you made that decision. But now, because of COVID, some people find themselves, they've signed up perhaps, let's say, to work for EY or one of the other large consultancy companies because they really wanted to be in a room learning from the partners and being inspired by all these great people in the organization. And then they found themselves working from home, having no access to those people. And what if that company would then make the decision to work remotely forever? That may not be in line with the expectations.
It's interesting. I know one gentleman who's a client down in Victoria, and a more mature gentleman, not unlike myself. Maybe I wouldn't call myself a gentleman, but he has a very calming, sensible experience, background, approach to things. And you see, I've seen other people in the more junior people go to him for his counsel. And now he lives, actually, it was a 2-hour transportation nightmare for him to get into the office every day and of course back. So that's 4 hours in his day he now has back. And whilst that is great for him, I wonder, do you think a lot of these larger workforce organizations are going to miss that mentor, that silent supporter, that guider, that influencer who does it very gently and softly without being brash and big mouth? And I don't mean that in a disrespectful way, but that quiet influencer.
Yeah, and that comes back to, again, understanding the organization. Like, you can build trust remotely and virtually. I've got colleagues in the States, for example, that I've been getting to know them during the COVID-19 pandemic a lot more, because prior to that, we didn't have our weekly catch-ups, and we started that during the pandemic. We've really created trust, and I found a mentor there as well. So it is possible, but again, how are you equipping your leaders to make sure that they are kind of sharing with the people that need to hear, that they are available for those type of discussions? Because from the perspective of someone that wants mentoring, it's often very hard to reach out because you feel like you're bothering a person, for example, for their time.
Sure. And James, do you think if a person who's in a bit of trouble, I know that, and I mean that emotional trouble or some personal issues, and in my career, many times, there was a knock at the door, and someone would say, "Boss, can I have a few minutes of your time? There's something I'd like to share with you, but you can't tell anyone." Do you think that could be much harder and more difficult in a remote situation?
Brian, I think my thinking at this point in time has really changed. Initially, I thought there was no way you could form a bond. There was no way you could form trust. There was no way you could have an emotional conversation online. And it was my daughter, obviously a completely different generation. She's 30 something years younger than me. And she's a psychologist, only she does the clinical side rather than my choice to do the more organizational side. Her entire practice is online. And her entire generation has no problem doing deep psychological, emotionally emotive therapy. She's got clients in London. She's got clients all over Australia, all over the US. So for her and her generation, it's a no-brainer. Whereas maybe you and I feel a little strange doing a therapy session online. So yeah, maybe us old folks just need to get out of the way for the younger folks. Or once again, it's fit, right? Those of us that grew up, before television had to adjust to television. Then we had to learn how to use the internet. Then we had to learn.
Hey, listen, I'd just like to point out there was always TV when I was growing up.
Well, we didn't own one when I was very young. I remember my grandmother getting the first TV. But, we learned, right? And we've adapted. So, maybe in 5 years, Brian, you and I will have, I know, like I said, I've changed in the last year. I'm much more comfortable on Zoom now than I was 12 months ago. So, yeah, that's.
But I remember, okay, so let me take it to another angle. I had one gentleman who was a CISO of a large company, large organization. And he said, Brian, he said, I loved the first 5-6 weeks was fantastic. I loved the fact of working from home, the flexibility of hours, blah, 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 blah. He said, but my diary would fill up with back-to-back Zoom or Teams calls, and I was leaving less time for myself. He said, and what the biggest thing I noticed, I felt like I was only getting 50% of the business intelligence, because I never realized how much those coffee conversations, the meetings in the hallway, the ability to just walk around the corner to someone sitting at their desk and have a chat, and a lot of the informal communications actually informed him about how to perform his job more aptly. Is there a way we can do that online?
That is a very good question, and that is something we are seeing across the board. People are really thinking about how can we have those serendipitous interactions when people work remotely. You can do a whole bunch of things like planning in random virtual coffee chats, for example, once a week for 15 minutes with some random person in your company, get to know them. But it's still, it's not the same, because you won't be eavesdropping in on other people's conversations and actually, bouncing back some ideas where it wasn't planned. A couple of days ago, very interestingly, I was invited to a demo of a new technology, which is like a virtual world of your own organization. They've got a 2D and a 3D version. It's called conversational AI, and I think that platform is called Gather. And what it is you see the platform. If you're in the 2D version, you see the floor plan of your organization, and you are an avatar. So at the beginning of the day, you log in with your mouse or your arrows. You can walk and on the floor plan. And when you're getting close to someone else, your audio turns on automatically, so that you can start a conversation. It was just mind blowing. And is that the perfect solution? I don't know. You still have to do the effort of walking your avatar through the space. But yeah, I think the people are working on it, and I'm really excited to see what more will be discovered here.
Just some feedback from the audience,
Hmm.
and thank you folks for sending your commentary in. One person was here that they were in a CIO's position for 3.5 years, and they never once got together face to face with the team. So because they were disparate workforce, and it was he found it a lot harder to get the team working. However, they developed a process, they normalized the process, and at the end, they did make successful working relationships happen, but it was more difficult. And there's just another comment there that is, it's much harder to support a staff member having personal issues. I had to assist one of my managers, direct reports, who went through a divorce during COVID. We got through it, but yes, much harder, not impossible. Okay, you can get through it. But the question I have, and be interesting again, hit you on the psychology position, James. Does it affect the healing process? And whilst we think we help them through it, are they through as successfully as they would have been otherwise?
Only thing I can tell you, Brian, and everybody, is about a little research I read quite a long time ago now, when we were first starting to do online teleconferencing, long before COVID. This is a decade ago, when I was still a full-time researcher and writer and academic. And the data was pretty clear that they took classic experiment, two different groups, and they looked at group development processes over time, a face-to-face group and a completely virtual group, and then some hybrid groups. And the face-to-face group matured more quickly and had better relationships. The group that never met was the slowest. And the best hybrid version was when people met face-to-face and then did everything else online, so that they established that we're social beings. So yeah, maybe while my daughter's generation finds it a little easier, maybe it'll never be as good if we're totally face-to-face. I think Tikka mentioned at the beginning, no one's really going to know this. It's all going to play itself out over the next little while. But look, for what it's worth, the data basically says, yes, we're social animals and we do respond better face-to-face. It certainly can be done in hybrid mode. And if you're going to do it in hybrid mode, get people together either at the beginning or once in a while, and then we can do maintenance. Maybe that's the right word, with the online. Hopefully that makes sense. It's a good language to use.
It's quite interesting. Oh, sorry, Tikka, you go.
Oh, just a very quick comment. I think that, especially when you get to know people virtually, once you see them in the flesh, it's kind of solidifies the bond and the trust, and it's very special then. Yeah.
Okay. So it's interesting that the AI platform, I thought you said you might have been called Gather. It sort of reminds me of, and I'm getting on a bit, right? My brain is not as potent as it once was, but there was
Second Life.
Second Life. Yes, thank you. You knew where I was going. We have discussed this. Okay, there was a Second Life, and that took on. It was a virtual online meeting platform. What evolved out of that was we saw the introduction of legislation in some countries. People were making complaints of rape, theft, robbery, violence, and we saw it start actually to build momentum as a legalistic issue. So all of those workplace issues about conduct, behavior, sexual harassment, bullying, you can see those exact same scenarios playing out in that sort of interactive platform. So the other question is, does that make it toxic, or more
Wow.
toxic, or safer?
That is so interesting because when we are in the virtual world, we are behind the screen, and it kind of feels like when you create an avatar, you can hide yourself behind that avatar, and you can be basically someone you want to be, and it can be positive but also negative, as well as we've seen with the Second Life platform.
Yeah.
So, and I think that is something that it's not only when you're dealing with avatars, but also when you're maybe writing emails or dealing with virtual calls, maybe without having seeing someone's face. You can be a little bit different than that you would be if you would really see someone in real life. Yeah.
So could remote working sort of diminish the effectiveness of EQ, emotional intelligence?
It could be, Brian, because look, to support what Tikka just said, even the research now that's even older than the research I just mentioned, when we were first being able to email each other, there was this thing called email flaming, right? Where people would, because of the anonymity, blow up, right, and flame and get out of control. So there's an inhibition when we're face to face. We're much more sensitive to and careful. I'm much less likely to yell at someone or to flame. And with this anonymity of an avatar or an email, so yeah, we have to be really careful because there's a positive social inhibition, when we're face to face like that. And yeah, it's going to play out if we continue to do this.
Okay, we've raised a lot of issues and a lot of areas we could talk for some time. But if I just quickly, let's just explore, in your view, some of the pros and cons from a hybrid remote workforce, and some of the benefits and some of the perhaps challenges.
So with a hybrid workforce, I think just we need to clarify what that means, of course. So let's say hybrid workforce means that you can work flexibly from any place you want, but you will be in the office some of the time, perhaps. I think the benefits are that there is this opportunity to create the right fit, again, to use James' terminology, for for the organization and the employees alike. But it is more complex, and that is the challenge that we have at hand. There are a lot of challenges that that oppose each other, or how can I say that? Like if you give someone a lot of, let's say, you're saying, okay, you can work as flexibly as you want, so that is good for people's well-being, perhaps because they've got autonomy. But then in the long run, they would actually have less business opportunities and learning opportunities, because we know that based on research, if you don't see people as much in the office, or then that will go down. So then, there are the two opposites, and there are a lot of examples of those two opposites. Like if you go too far this way or too far that way, it actually doesn't work. Yeah, so it's really complex. Hybrid working, but it can be good if it's done well. Yeah.
Does that come back to the attitude and the performance of the individual?
Yeah, but also the tools that they are given. And again, you need to have the business outcomes, and you've got the personal preferences, right?
Yeah, we haven't raised the whole business outcome conversation yet, which I would like to explore. Does that also then, James, mean even more pressure on managers and leaders, because they tend to be more accountable of those business outcomes? So are we burdening the line managers, the supervisors, and the executive of organizations with a more difficult task? Because leading people, the HR issues, tend to be the biggest bane of any manager.
I think you're right, Mark. It does make it more complex. The way I think about it is that the manager's role is multifaceted, right? We've got social aspects being managers, we've got decisional roles, legal roles, symbolic roles, informational roles. There may even be more. Those are the old Mintzberg roles that come to my mind. And as a manager, you do all of that, right? You get groups of people and you build trust socially, but you make decisions, you share information, you preside over morning teas, and you open meetings. I mean, it's a lot of stuff to do. And now we've got to learn to do it face to face. We've got to learn to do it sometimes online. We've got to recognize that, Tikka likes it online, but Brian likes it face to face, and I've got to deal with that. And so, yeah, it's complicated. It's one of the worst jobs in the world, being a manager. Very underappreciated and difficult. And this is just going to make it even more difficult because of all reasons and many more. Right?
Do you think then that there is like whose job is it to educate managers to function in a virtual space? Like, is that something they need to kind of learn themselves via reading books and blogs and peer groups, or would that be a course that you do that's being delivered by the organization?
It's good. I've not seen any MBA programs yet, for example, that have courses on, virtual managership. But I
well,
suspect
that is a good idea. There you
absolutely
go.
right. Could be on the way. If any of you've seen them yet, please let us know. But I haven't heard of it.
So maybe that's one of the things. Obviously, we need to continue to evolve our thinking, and then how do we support the manager and the leader inside an organization? That makes perfect sense. Maybe we kicked off something brand new here today without even realizing it. So any ideas then how we minimize the negatives of remote access? At the moment, we're talking potential a loss in productivity, potentially a loss of creativity, potentially a loss of emotional intelligence, potentially a loss of team harmonization. This could lead to exacerbated negative behaviors in the virtual online space. Email, I'll use James' term for consistency, email flaming. How do we actually minimize the potential negative consequences as leaders, as managers? What advice would you give them?
Like, the thing that came up in my mind is transparency, so that you know what's going on, but then more transparency doesn't necessarily lead to more trust. Like, if you would have transparency in systems, and you can basically see what people are saying to each other and how they are behaving, maybe that will give you an idea of what's going on. But then, is that the right way? Maybe the right way is to actually do more effort by talking to your people and really know how they are feeling, rather than using a system to do that transparency for you.
Okay, James. Yeah. Number one, look, I still think being face-to-face matters. Classic studies, again, that were done going back to the old academic days, where we looked at communication networks in people who were near toilets, for example, or near coffee rooms. They actually had richer social and interaction networks than people who were on the periphery of organizations. You wouldn't think being near the loo is a good idea, but it really is, because everybody several times a day is going to pass the coffee room, the tea room, it's going to come to the loo, and they're going to pop in. And so location matters, right? And face-to-face matters. But the only other thing that I can add is that when I first started teaching online, what I noticed was I had to learn to structure things more. And I still do that when I'm running my virtual meetings and my courses. I run so many courses now online and Zoom and Collaborate and all these things. And I find I just need to structure them better. When we're face to face, it's easy. I can say, what do you think? What do you think? Turn your partners, have a chat. We can chat. I find I can't chat. I have to structure it and say, you two, we need to create virtual rooms, or I need to be very, structured, pedantic, much more autocratic in making that happen. That seems to help.
Yeah, and with those virtual rooms and the breakout groups in, WebEx and Zoom, you can't yeah, you can drop in as a leader to see how they're doing, but only one at a time. You can't see the overview of how the whole group is actually doing and interacting.
I mean, folks, you don't have to fall on the sword here, or, but let me ask you the question. Have you ever been guilty of being in a virtual room or in a Zoom meeting and you've turned your camera off and you're doing emails and 6 other things whilst this buzz of noise is going in the background? And is it fair to say, and I put it both hands, is it also fair to say then that that's something that wouldn't have occurred if you'd been in a face-to-face boardroom and you would have been more committed to and focused on the conversation?
A lot harder to hide when you're face to face.
It's much harder to hide when you're face to face, but also when you make the decision whether you are going to join that meeting or not. You may have said no, but because it's virtual, it's a lower barrier to just join in half and kind of, yeah.
Okay, or just going back to you're spot on. James, should you always, as a manager and leader, should you have a ground rule that says you're building that structure, okay, but everyone must leave sound and camera on?
Once again, Brian, I come back to our fit right from the beginning. I think sometimes that's a totally appropriate thing to do if it's really important, but I have no problem. Like Tika said, sometimes I am in a meeting just half there, and sometimes I think that's okay. I just keep it on in the background because this is not 100%. I'm not leading it, for example, or it's just peripheral information for me. So it's like having the baseball game on the background, the radio on in the background, the cricket match on in the background while I'm doing something else.
But what if it's you were leading your team?
Well, yeah, I better be there if I'm the leader, right?
But would you want all your team members to actually leave their cameras on?
I'm okay with there's a core group that I need. So let me talk about it another way. If it's you and me and Ryan and Tika having a meeting and you're hiding, I'm going to wonder what the hell's going on. But if there's 30 people in the meeting and you and Ryan and Tika and I are really focusing together, and I know there's a couple of people in the background, personally, I got no problem if a couple of people are just half listening.
So
Okay.
it depends on the role of the people then. Like if you're working on a project and you've got the core project group and there are a couple of people that may need to do something, and maybe 5 minutes of the conversation that's what's going to be important to them, that's fine. But if you've got a weekly team meeting and you don't see the team at all, it's completely remotely, I think that's an opportunity to say, hey guys, girls, guys, everyone, let's turn on our cameras, at least during our team meetings. Yeah.
So Tika, I want to explore something you said earlier, and you mentioned 2 words, both start with the letter T. Mm-hmm. Transparency, and then you mentioned trust.
Yes.
So we know that there's a myriad of new technologies emerging with artificial intelligence to start to determine the happiness, the emotional state, the productivity of an employee. Do you have any thoughts around that? Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Yeah, there are a lot of things that are coming up now. And I think what I said before, as a manager, it is important that you've got that real bond with your people and you know what is going on. And I think technology platforms can give you maybe an additional perspective, but be very careful with what type of platforms you do deal with, so to say. There are now, I've seen a couple of platforms coming up now with they are really focused around well-being. So I don't know what kind of information they take, but they give you a well-being score. And oh yeah, I remember. So you actually do surveys, random surveys, 1 or 2 questions each day. They give you a score, and based on that score, they may give you like a mindfulness exercise, and you get incentivized to actually respond to survey questions, because people are they usually don't want to actually do that, or you're lazy, or we think it's not important. But if you're incentivized, for example, you get a voucher for Starbucks or something else, then you may be like, I like a free coffee, let's just do this. But if you have a platform like that, I think be very mindful that you don't just rely on that platform as the tool. It is something that can be extra, but not
Yeah.
the thing. And what are the privacy implications?
And the privacy implications for me, that frightens me,
Yeah.
because there's no doubt in my mind, I talk about the criminals being using artificial intelligence to start to better understand, and they have already got a zillion pieces of data out there, and we know they're building profiles. If they can match a personality, a behavioral, and a thought thinking profile to an entity, and then use AI to develop, say, this is the best methodology to exploit this criminal activity against this criminal target, and let's automate it. That scares the living daylights out of me. I see I struggle with that.
Terrifying, Brian.
Yeah. Okay. So transparency and trust. I think, we could probably explore the issue of privacy on this issue for a while,
Yeah.
but it does build the case, does it not? What's helped us get through this is an incredible effort by the IT community across this country, and indeed, of course, the world, to bring communities of people together, internal and external to the organizations, to still be effective. So that draws it one thing from the IT. It enables things, but we've not really, and I don't want to hijack it with the issue of security. But if we look at the massive, the oil industry, or the community feeding on petrol in the United States recently, was brought to its knees by the takedown of colonial oil. Okay, technically they took down part of it, inability of organizations to play, and they shut down the pipeline as a consequence. So, but that breach occurred on the back of an insecure access point for remote working. They rolled out the IT because of the COVID response, and which meant that organization as a consequence became insecure. And I think, quite frankly, that's a scenario that's going to play out for some time. As I said, it's and if now we have tools, IT or digitally based, monitoring people's behavior, I would see that as extremely attractive to a cyber criminal looking to use intelligence moving forward to make an attack. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think, it's not only just to enable people to work effectively remotely, like technologies to do that, but we also see the physical office buildings getting smarter and equipped with beacons all over. Because, the actual office needs to be smart and technology enabled as well to also enable that remote workforce. So what we are seeing in the workplace space, for example, are, of course, you've got the desk booking systems, but you also have the beacons and sensors that show you who sits, not who sits where, but is there a person sitting at this desk? Is it available or not? So that before you decide whether you go into the office or not, you can actually book a certain desk that is still available. But you also have sensors that can now actually look at how people are feeling, or what their heart rate is. They can look into how fast someone walks, how much noise there is in a certain spot of the workplace. The possibilities are endless. And the question is, how far do we go? But also in terms of privacy, but also and this is, your guys' area, when you've got all those extra technologies and sensors plugging into the IT system, is that a threat, or would that make the overall IT system less strong or more vulnerable, perhaps?
Well, I think the more you connect devices in, most devices are connected to perform a function, and security tends to be the afterthought. And I think many medical environments are a perfect example of that. I read something, I'll be loose in this quote. The average hospital room contains 15 to 20 medical devices that are connected to it. Something like 60%, the average vulnerability in a medical device is 6.2 vulnerabilities per device, and that's 15 to 20, therefore vulnerable. So that, what are we up to? Say 20 times 6.2, we're already up to 120 vulnerabilities in a room. And 60% of medical technologies or medical devices are already post-dated their effectiveness. They cannot be updated. They've gone end of life. I mean, that's just a disaster. If you start throwing all, just as a simple example, I'm not picking on health, of course, but I think the more you extend your digital footprint, the more vulnerabilities there are going to be, and that leads to then potential breaches, which we've seen so many of in recent times.
What do you maybe, if I may ask a question, it just popped in my head.
That's my job. You can't ask questions.
I'm actually really curious about like facial recognition to access buildings.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think you're asking is it safe?
Yeah. Yeah. Is it a good thing? It's very seamless, of course. And
look, I actually, to me, everything we do carries a risk. If you jump in your car and drive down the road, can you guarantee me you're not going to have an accident? And the answer to that is no. But you're prepared for that risk. You've got your health insurance, you've got insurance on your car, you've got all the safety devices that have evolved over the last 100 years to actually almost guarantee you're not going to die in that accident. We know that, of course, that occurs. And when it does occur, what is the greatest driver? It's human behavior, not the failure of the technology of the motor vehicle. And so for me, we're at a point in time, we've got to stop thinking about, is this going to be secure today? And then stop thinking that, that'll we'll be right now for the next 20 years. We don't have to worry about it. Everything is constantly evolving. So we've got to look to continually upgrade. So to me, my answer, I remember doing an interview with a Financial Review I was running a workshop on identity crime. It would have been about 6 years ago. And I said, I think, we're talking about facial recognition and tethering phones and all this sort of stuff. And I said, I think that we will continue to evolve. And it was all mainly around, that's right, biometric. And the big thing was fingerprints. And I said, I think it's pretty good for the moment. But where I expected to see is dynamic digital biometrics. Because at the end of the day, a fingerprint is converted to an algorithm, which is fundamentally a piece of code, and code can be copied. We know, for example, that the banks thought they had the problem solved for internet banking security when they started taking digital device fingerprints, so digital fingerprints of the device that you connect to. But now there's a website in the dark web that specializes in buying and selling and trading in those device fingerprints. So it's just another piece of code. So where I expected to go was dynamic digital biometrics that are one-off. For example, your voice. If you turned your phone on, it popped up with an alphanumeric 6 character one-time use password. You've got 4 seconds to read that into your device. So I think that we'll see things like that emerge, and that will then extend the validity and security of that. But to a large extent, I think we're all compromised in how do we actually manage and mitigate the risk going forward. What we're talking now if we're starting to collect data on people's attitudes, beliefs, personalities, emotional traits, that really does actually, I can see so many negative things that could emanate from that. So it's going to be interesting, but
it's not even necessary, Brian. I think because I think we've talked about this before as well, because you run a company and you actually don't want to measure the inputs. We have this, it's like the punch clock. Who cares if someone's sitting at their desk or how many keystrokes they're doing? You care about the outputs. You care about how many sales they make or how satisfied the customers are or what a good job we do on helping change someone's culture. It doesn't matter whether I do that in 1 hour or it takes me 1 hour to do it or it takes me 22 hours to do it. So all these input device measures, I think are missing the point, right?
But does that come back to a lack of trust of the people to be effective without supervision, Tikka?
That's
Yeah.
certainly where the old punch clock came from, right? You didn't trust someone to be there, so you asked them to punch a clock, right?
Yeah.
So how does a manager and leader in a remote or hybrid workforce model strive to build a culture that makes this something very successful?
I think that would again come down to co-creation. So you sit down with the individual team members and look at KPIs that are outcome based, and potentially also include EQ type of. Well, that's perhaps more like, is it an outcome? It's also part of the process. Like, how do you deal with people and your overall behavior? I don't know how you would be able to measure that perhaps, but more like the soft side outcomes, this the EQ type of things. I'm just trying to think of an example of what that can mean, what that could be. But yeah, it may be based on a testimonial from a client, that is about, you know, how you deal with your clients from not just from an outcome basis, but from a personal EQ basis.
Okay.
Yeah, so
No, that
co-creation.
makes sense.
Yeah.
I actually love your thoughts, James.
No, I like the co-creation idea too.
I like that.
I like aligned interests. Again, being an organizational psychologist, coming from psychology, I always look at what's the motivation, right? What would motivate someone? How could we align our interests? And there's a famous guy now, he's, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago, a guy named Ricardo Semler from Brazil wrote a book called Maverick. And he's radical. He aligns every level in a hierarchical organization's interest with every other level. So the employees are completely participative and they make decisions about, here's your budget. You can spend that budget on furniture. You could spend that budget on more salaries for yourself. You could spend that, and at the end of the year, when we make a profit as a company, you get a profit share. So in every possible way, he aligns the individual with the group, with the organization, so that when I leave the room, I turn off the lights because I don't want to waste my money, right? And everybody wins and everybody's aligned. And I don't see human selfishness in that sense as being a negative. I see aligned, collaborative self-interest. So that's one of the ways I'd solve the problem, right?
Sounds
fascinating.
Good. Yeah, it is fascinating. The so if I just reflect, so far we've got structure, co-creation, outcome focus, build a program of aligned interest. Now we've used the term hybrid model. How important, James, from a psychology perspective, is it to have at least sometimes, if it can be achieved, a face-to-face meeting with that team?
Yeah, if you're asking from my experiential opinion and my professional opinion and from what I've read in the research, it's, if you can do it, like we mentioned, there's sometimes when you can't do it, and that's great, don't do it. But if you can, I think there's serious value in it. I still get together with my colleagues that I work with once a week socially because we like each other, you know, and we want to find out what's going on with your kids and your hospital and your kidneys or whatever it is that's going on this week with you, right? And so we tend to use the online work stuff for online work stuff, but then we still want to get together socially and have a pizza and have a beer. And I think that's incredibly valuable, and I will continue to do that because I find that valuable.
So on that point, how important is it to actually have work time, downtime, to get on a call and just explore each other's whatever's going on in your life? And you talk about anything for the next 30 minutes, but not work.
So important. Like the person or the colleague I mentioned earlier, who's based in the US, who I now see as a mentor. When we started to do our weekly catch-ups, just 30 minutes, we said it's not going to be about work. And we've created this special bond, and we know so much about each other. We've never seen each other. I think this relates to inherent motivation of not only doing good work, but also about wanting to actually meet someone and see someone in person. So especially in the real estate sector and also for the overall CBD economies, we are seeing that a lot of businesses are thinking about how can we get our people back into our workplaces, because we want to fill up our offices again. Of course, landlords will be very happy with that, but also the whole economy, the city, cafes, shops, all of that, all need food traffic and people in cities. You can do that by, first of all, the stick approach, mandating people to come back. The carrot approach, saying like the FOMO, fear of missing out, we are going to create these amazing experiences, free coffee, free popcorn, movie night, whatever it is, to attract people back. And even the fear of missing out by saying, oh, yeah, you didn't get that opportunity because you weren't in the workplace today, So that is leading by fear. But I think the last approach can be that inherent motivation. If your culture is right from the start and over the long run, people would want to see each other. And it may not have to be every day, but once a week. And that is because they want to.
But we won't have time to erase the issue, though, if with your new hires that haven't been sort of brought in and inducted into the workplace culture, they're going to struggle with that, because they may feel well and truly left out.
And they will have that inherent motivation of seeing people, right?
We hope.
Sorry?
We hope.
We hope, yeah. Oh, it is. I think we're almost at the time.
Yeah,
right?
we are. So, folks, on that, if I just leave the last 10 seconds, is there one point you would like to make before I wrap this up today, James? Because I'm going to give the last voice to Tikka.
Yeah, for me, I think the final thing to say is there is still some value in face-to-face, getting to know people beyond work. And while it may not be the only thing, and there are other options, there's still value in it. And I think we should do it when and if we can. And if we can't, well, then we do the best we can.
Thank you. Tikka, final words.
When designing for your workplace strategy and ways of working strategy, make sure you do it based on insights of your particular company, based on the goals, based on the teams, and based on the individual requirements, and
Wonderful.
Then start from there.
All right, James and Tikka, thank you very much for your time. The audience, I really appreciate you sharing your time with us today, and there will be a copy of this made available for your reference down the track. If there's anything you would like us to explore in another webinar, please reach out to us, let you know. We'd love to. I think it's a fascinating subject that's going to be a hot topic for a very long period of time. So thank you. Have a brilliant day, and we will close the webinar now. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.